One particular night, when I was visiting Lake Minchin in New Zealand, I was on a backpacking trip, sometime in late February or early March. The trip was a spur-of-the-moment decision. I wanted to get away from the city and experience nature's serenity. Having heard so much about New Zealand's stunning landscapes and lakes, it seemed like the right escape. Lake Minchin was my choice for a moonlit swim. An old Kiwi friend from my university days had once told me it was a place of ethereal beauty. I imagined silvery waters under the moon and stars, a break from the busy city life. So there I was, standing at the edge of Lake Minchin, the cold sand scrunching between my toes. The place was deserted. The only sound was the soft lapping of the lake's waves, creating a rhythmic lullaby. Overhead, the sky was filled with stars, with the Milky Way clearly visible. I stripped down to my underwear and inhaled the crisp night air. The smell was earthy, damp soil, aquatic plants, and a hint of brine. Expecting the water to be cold, I waded in knee-deep first, the water lapping around my shins. A little shiver ran up my spine. Freezing, I muttered to myself. But in actuality, the invigorating chill was just what I had been looking forward to. There was just something alluring about a late-night swim. With the cool water surrounding me, I felt my movements echoing beneath the surface, the stars watching overhead. It felt like entering a different realm, distinct from the familiar dry land. Taking a deep breath, I dived into the rest of the swim. The water felt smooth against my skin, washing away my stress. For a while, I just floated on my back, looking at the stars above, the water gently rocking me like nature's very own cradle. Suddenly, I felt something beneath me. Initially, I dismissed it as my feet grazing some underwater plants. But then it happened again, an enormous draft, like something huge moving beneath me. The once comforting rocking grew choppy, followed by a series of waves that threatened to overturn me. The silence of the night was disrupted by what sounded like a huge splash, a hefty mass displacing water at an alarming rate. I squinted at the darkness, trying to get a fix on whatever was causing this. All of a sudden, something breached the surface of the water, causing a gigantic splash that sent me tumbling back into the water. I barely caught the vaguest silhouette of something. My mind raced to make sense of it, but all I could make out was a colossal, serpentine shadow, akin to the dragons you read about in fantasy novels. There was a strange smell too, beyond the brine, a foul, unnatural odor that was hard to stomach. One moment, I was peacefully swimming under the stars, and then everything changed. I frantically spun around, started swimming towards the shore with all the strength I could muster. The creature sent another violent wave, nearly disorienting me. I kicked harder, my blood pounding and cold fear gripping my gut. With the silhouette in my peripheral vision, I surged ahead, driven by adrenaline. I had no idea what that thing was, but one thing seemed clear to me. It was enormous. It churned the water, and each splash echoed like a thunderclap in the silent night. Before I knew it, I was coughing and sputtering in the shallows. I stumbled onto the shore, feeling my heart's pulse in my throat. I quickly dressed, my hands shaking and breath ragged. I risked a quick glance back at the water, half afraid of what I might see. The once tranquil black mirror of the lake was a turmoil of waves and eddies, but the silhouette was nowhere to be seen. In that moment, I felt the weight of my solitude. I was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with something terrifying in the lake. I didn't stick around to give that creature a chance to reappear. I left my things and took off, driven by adrenaline and pure, unfiltered fear. Later, under the safety of daylight, I went back for my belongings. I stared at the calm surface of the lake, now seemingly untouched, safe. Yet, under that tranquil surface, I couldn't help but picture a monster, lurking, waiting. A chill ran up my spine, a stark reminder of the previous night. It was a chill deeper than fear, a reminder of the unresolved mystery from my midnight swim. I've never returned to Lake Minchin for a night swim, but the allure of the mystery still beckons. Was it a rogue wave, an oversized eel, or a driftwood? Or was it the serpentine dragon beast my panicked mind painted it to be? Most of my friends have sensible explanations. But there's that oddball theorist who would tell you, Lake Minchin has its monster, a warning to all moonlit swimmers. Before you dive into a serene lake, you never know who or what might join you. This story takes place a couple years back, while I was on a road trip through the stark yet beautiful terrains of western Texas. I'd always been drawn to the idea of a solo road trip, a journey of self-discovery really. I wanted to trade the concrete hustle of city life for a raw, untouched expanse of solitude, where the earth meets the sky at a distant horizon. That fascination can be quite a drug, you know? So, there I was, midway into my trip, enjoying the sense of isolation, the therapeutic hum of my car's engine muffled by a playlist of my favorite tunes. It was a typical day, filled with roadside diversions, camera clicks capturing unique rock formations, and the radiant colors of the setting sun. I was slowly sinking into the rhythm of the road. Wake up at the crack of dawn, drive until sunset, find a quiet spot to camp, and do it all over again the next day. One particular evening stands out. I remember pulling over, entranced by this mesmerizing desert sunset. Hues of pink, purple, and deep orange, elegantly draped over the sand and rock. And me, chasing fleeting moments through the lens of my camera. The beauty of Texas slowly imprinted onto my memory. That sunset acted as my perfect backdrop. Just as I was wrapping the day's shoot, something peculiar caught my eye up in the dusky sky. A lustrous object, glinting in the fading sunlight. At first, I thought it was a plane or maybe a drone. My curiosity piqued. I decided to train my camera on the airborne object. My viewfinder served as binoculars of sorts. As my lens came into focus, I realized this was not an ordinary object. It was entirely metallic, reflective, and hovering without any discernible propulsion. Odd as it was beautiful. I dismissed it as some uncharted military hardware. I've read the articles, you know. Sightings around desert stretches often get explained as military maneuvers. However, the isolation of the surrounding area still made me uneasy. I was worried turning away might make me vulnerable somehow, so I watched. I watched the object perform inexplicable aerial maneuvers. Its movements were nothing short of hypnotic, defying conventional aerodynamics. Sharp turns, hovering, and sudden accelerations. Maybe it was a drill of some kind. Why else would it have been flying in patterns like that? I sensed a hum, a strange mechanical noise that I can't quite explain. Figuring this was too unusual to leave uncaptured, I switched my camera back to video mode and hit the button to start recording just as the object began behaving erratically. Just as quickly as it had appeared, it started to descend rapidly in a free-fall manner. Then at the last second, surged forward in a blink, crashing somewhere in the distance with a brilliant flash of light that painted the desert night in its glow. Caught in a wave of anticipation, fear, and curiosity, I decided to head in the direction of the crash. Little did I know then, my adventure had only just begun. Back in my car, my heart was racing. The entire landscape was plunged into darkness after the brilliant flash. The silence was only broken by the faint hum of my car's engine as I navigated the undulating desert terrain. The crash site was a few miles to the north. I parked my car at a distance and grabbed my camera bag, flashlight, and some water. I was preparing myself for a trek into the unknown. It wasn't long before I was standing at the edge of a smoldering crater, staring slack-jawed at the wreckage of the strange object. The fallen object was only a few feet in diameter. Parts of it still glowed faintly in the dark. The eerie silence was periodically broken by soft humming noises that seemed to be originating from the wreckage itself. A ghostly glow reflected off of its metal frame. It seemed to have a few rotating lights attached to its base, fluctuating between blues, greens, and reds. With my camera, I started taking as many shots as possible of its contours, composition, and the charred ground around it. I was no expert, but the technology seemed way beyond any human ingenuity, almost alien-like. The sight was frightening and fascinating all at once. Out of nowhere, bright headlights flooded the area. I dropped my bag, shielding my eyes from the sudden harsh light, and spun around to find a convoy of black SUVs cutting through the desolate landscape towards me. Men in black tactical gear poured out of the vehicles. Their badges reflected the headlights of the SUVs. They warned me off the sight, their voices stern, demeanor unfriendly. In the flurry of the moment, I grabbed my camera bag and retreated hastily towards my car. My heart raced as I fumbled with my keys, the heavy presence of unwanted company anchoring me to reality. I turned on the ignition and peeled away from the scene, careful not to glance in my rearview mirror till I was a safe distance away. Safe from what, though? That's a question I still grapple with. The episode left me with a sense of profound unease that lingered long after I was distanced from the site of my encounter. The isolated nameless spots in the desert suddenly felt secretive and eerie, repositories of truths we humans aren't prepared for. The thought of finding peace and self-reflection out there now feels like a foolish idea. The memory of that night haunts me with a mixed sense of wonder and trepidation. Was I lucky to have witnessed something so extraordinary? Or was it just a hair's breadth escape from a potential threat? Did I come face to face with tangible proof of an extraterrestrial existence? Something beyond our own petty squabbles on this small planet? And who were those men in the SUVs? Government agents on a potential cover-up mission? I kept my video footage out of their reach, filing away my digital evidence and the chilling memory of that Texas desert encounter. The world continued in oblivious rhythm, none the wiser about what we may be sharing our universe with. And so, that's my story. Bizarre to the core, obscured by complex layers of uncertainty, clandestine operations, and extraterrestrial accidents. Thanks for letting me share. When I scored tickets to tour the Queen Mary, a retired ocean liner docked outside of Long Beach, I couldn't believe my luck. I didn't think my passion for all things nautical would lead to an encounter I'd never forget. It was a clear and sunny Tuesday, early autumn. The temperature held just a hint of winter, enough to warrant a cozy jacket, but not enough for me to ruin my hair with a tight-knit cap. The way the sun reflected off the Pacific with a diamond-like sparkle, you could tell it was going to be a memorable day. Stepping onto that grand old lady, named after Queen Mary of Tech, was like being magically transported into a bygone era. I had always been deeply fascinated by the sea, those great vessels that rode upon it, and the mysteries they carried within their steel bellies. Visiting the Queen Mary was a pilgrimage of sorts. Even in her permanent mooring, she was majestic, a titan harking back to an age of luxury liners, when crossing the Atlantic was an event more like a royal adventure than the commonplace journey it is today. Like any self-professed history nerd, I had done my homework before joining the tour. The Queen Mary wasn't just any ship after all. She was a legend. Built and launched in the 1930s, she spent 3 decades cutting through oceans at record speeds. She served as a cruise ship, a W-2 troop carrier, earning her the nickname the Gray Ghost, and then again as a cruise ship until she finally retired to a life of hosting tourists like myself in the sunny shores of Long Beach. Visiting her was like paying respects to a delectable relic of a mooted past. My tour of the ship started out normal enough, basking in the history of the colossal vessel. Every room teemed with stories from a lost era. The grand ballroom where passengers, dressed in gowns and tuxedos, danced the night away under the warm gleam of the elegant chandeliers. The promenade deck, still clad in polished wood, once offered wealthy travelers the dreamiest views of the immense ocean. The old steam room below deck, where the air was heavy with the scent of antiquity. While roaming around, tapping into the historical gold mine that was every nook and cranny of this ship, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was never alone. The whispering echoes of the past seemed to follow me, making the hair at the back of my neck prickle. A sense of unseen eyes observing me, ghostly murmurs in the cold corridors, the slight unease in the otherwise serene settings, the inexplicable chill in certain parts of the ship. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the night unfurled its blanket, the flickers of unease that had haunted me all day began to amplify. I couldn't keep explaining my feelings as the weight of history pressed down around me. This was something more. Alone in my cabin, which once hosted the luminaries of the world, the uncanny sense of being watched became overwhelming. I could feel a presence, could almost hear the soft creak of floorboards, the echo of hushed footsteps, as if someone, no, not someone, more like something was trying to get my attention. But the true encounter, the unspoken communication with that otherworldly presence, was still to come. The ship and its past would soon reveal itself to me in a way I hadn't imagined. Little did I know, I was about to delve beyond the superficial beauty and grandeur of the Queen Mary. I'd be facing the hidden secrets that the historical voyage held. That night, I was awoken by the chilling grasp of a cold spot in my cabin. Strangely, even though I'd left the heater on, it felt like I was standing outside in a harsh winter. It was certainly colder than California had any right to be. The room's temperature plunged and made my breath cloud up in front of my eyes. Moving towards the thermostat, I felt my foot knock against something. Swinging my flashlight around, I noticed that my suitcase, which I'd earlier stowed under the bed, was now smack in the middle of the room. Strange, but maybe I'd not tucked it away properly. Too tired to think it over, I pushed it back under the bed and attempted to get the heater working again. Nothing. Resigned, I crawled back into bed, wrapped myself tightly in the heavy blankets, and hoped sleep would find me again. It did until a soft creaking jarred me awake. It sounded like someone pacing slowly in the room. The floorboards groaned under some spectral weight. Suddenly, a strong aroma of old perfume, mixed with sea air, filled the room. It was almost enough to make me gag. I swung the beam of my flashlight around nervously, trying to locate the source. When the beam landed on the hallway leading to the tiny unused kitchenette, I saw it. A transparent figure, female, dressed in a 1930s evening gown, standing silently. Her face was oddly pale and distorted, and her eyes shimmered in the dim cabin light. The shine in her gaze wasn't unlike the reflection of the sun on the ocean waves. She wore a sad expression, as if mourning her long-lost past. Frozen with terror, I watched as she began drifting slowly towards me. As she came closer, the temperature in the room seemed to drop even further, making me shiver uncontrollably. Then, just as I was about to scream, she stopped. Turning around, she faced the wall and simply seeped into it, disappearing from sight. My heart was pounding in my chest as I spent a sleepless night wondering what had just happened. What could it have been, besides a ghost? Did I even believe in those kinds of things? Morning couldn't come soon enough. When the dawn finally peeked through the cabin's tiny window, I was out of the room and exploring the section of the wall the spectral lady had passed through. There, hidden behind a false panel, I discovered a stash of letters dating back to the 1930s. Most seemed to be love letters between a passenger and someone named Margaret, full of longing, passion, and promises of meeting again, which possibly never happened. I still don't know if what I saw was real or some dreamy manifestation. All I know is the scent of vintage perfume still lingers on those letters. Did I encounter the ghost of a lady who once loved and lost aboard the majestic Queen Mary? Or was it something else? The details in the past, I decided, were best left untouched. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. That, however, won't stop me from visiting her again. As frightening as my first encounter aboard the Queen Mary was, it hasn't made the ship any less fascinating. Every creaking corridor, every chilly breeze feels like more than just a glimpse at history. It feels like you're a part of it. This isn't the only weird tale I've got in my arsenal. I've seen a lot of strange things in my time as a plumber. Not all of those things can be explained. This is the story I want to tell right now, though. It's unique because it didn't happen in my backyard. It happened several states away, actually. That didn't make it any less terrifying. It happened about 3 years ago in the Ocala National Forest, right smack in the middle of Florida. Me and a few buddies headed down there. Marty, Ed, and little Jojo. He's not really little, standing a whole head and a half taller than me. But that's a story for another time. We decided to make a camping trip out of it. I enjoy my pipe wrenches and sinks, but when I get the chance to breathe in the open air and gaze up at the stars without neon signs obscuring the view, you bet I'm there. Camping, it's a whole other kind of plumbing if you ask me, where instead of unclogging pipes, you're unclogging your soul. Sounds cheesy, I know, but bear with me, eh? So, we're out there in the middle of nowhere, an island of tents and laughter in the ocean of trees, all drawn together by the glow of a crackling fire. Marty's working on a pot of chili, Ed's strumming away on his old guitar, while little Jojo and I are just sitting there, chewing the fat and sharing manly stories. You know how it is. Once our bellies were full and the ghost stories were told, none of which could compare to what happened next, we decided it was time to hit the hay. Jojo and Marty took the first shift for bear watch since Ed and I had driven the whole day. Bear watch is a thing, right? Anyway, I should have started this off by saying I ain't one to believe in the supernatural. To me, the world is pipes and valves. Knowable, understandable. You might think there ain't much difference between Ohio and Florida, besides the weather and the accents, but you'd be wrong. That night, I'm cozy within my sleeping bag. I'm away from my problems, looking at the insides of my eyelids, when I was suddenly assaulted by a foul stench. It was like burning rubber doused in raw sewage. I almost tasted it too. I sat up, half expecting to see Jojo's socks on fire or something. The explanation wasn't so simple. To make things creepier, it was unnaturally silent. The forest had completely hushed up. The usual chirping of the crickets, the light rustling of leaves, all gone. I peeked outside and found Marty and Jojo snoozing by the smoldering embers of our fire. Some bear watchers those two turned out to be. I was about to give them both a piece of my mind when I heard it. It was a low growl from somewhere off in the dark, a sound so deep and rumbling. It was as if the earth itself was groaning. Something unfamiliar twisted my gut listening to it, and I figured at once that it wasn't some regular animal making that sound. Now here's where my skills as a storyteller fail me. That growl was like a joke told in a language you can't speak. I heard thunder, but didn't see any clouds. An animal, but not exactly natural. The sound that echoed through my ears was full of, I'm not sure what exactly, but it felt like rage, if that makes any sense. Like it wasn't just growling, it was yelling about something. Yelling at me, maybe. I scrambled to my feet, my sleepy haze washing away. Heart pounding like a jackhammer, I grabbed my flashlight and felt the world become too still around me. Even Marty and Jojo's regular breathing seemed to fade into the backdrop of the stifling silence. And that's when I saw it. Glowing faintly in the dark were two deep red spots about a good 50 yards off into the tree line. I thought it might be the glare of some critter, but even that felt wrong. My instincts were screaming that whatever I was looking at, whatever was looking at me, wasn't your run-of-the-mill bear or mountain lion. I shined my flashlight towards the red spots, and they disappeared. Yet I didn't hear any animal scramble away. It was as if it just vanished. Maybe I was just seeing things? I'm not the kind of guy who gets scared easily, you see, and I figured my mind was playing tricks on me, trying to make a mountain out of a molehill, as it were. But then I heard it again, that god-forsaken growl, now accompanied by a low, chilling bark, echoing through the forest like the sound of a trumpet announcing the apocalypse. I've been around dogs most of my life, having had several as pets, and having met countless more during my outings. Let me tell you, this was no dog. No, sir. It was as though the very souls of the damned themselves were barking in agony. I mean, whose blood wouldn't run cold hearing a sound like that? And I know how crazy that all sounds. Too biblical, I know. But it's what I felt in the moment. Doesn't get any truer than what you feel, right? Now, the chill running down my spine wasn't from the cold, I'll tell you that much. Even in the dim moonlight, I could make out the towering figure moving in the dark. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Big as a horse and more terrifying than one of Jojo's yarns. The weak beam of my flashlight practically bounced off its fur, a black so deep it seemed to swallow up the light. And then them eyes, demonic and fiery, reflected back a menacing red that seemed to bore right through me. I sprung into action, tossing my flashlight towards Marty and Jojo, and that was enough to rouse them. Man, you should have seen the looks on their faces when they saw the creature. Jojo looked like he'd seen a ghost, and even old Marty looked like he was about to lose his wits. They covered their noses and mouths to shield themselves from the reek coming off that creature. Like the breath of the underworld, it smelt like. It covered you like a damp blanket. Beads of fear formed on everyone's brow. That smell alone was enough to send us packing. I yelled at the beast, trying to scare it off while Marty and Jojo started hastily packing our gear. To our utter shock, the creature seemed unfazed. The usual tricks of waving a burning stick or yelling did nothing. I think it even sneered at us, if you can believe it. Odd, I know, but we didn't stick around to investigate. In minutes, we were barreling through the forest, leaving behind a wrecked campsite and probably a smug monstrosity. I kept looking back, half expecting to see the hell beast chasing us, but all I got was the faint glow of its eyes, like the taillights of a car disappearing in the night. That was some time ago now, and while we still love camping, we've yet to return to the Ocala National Forest. I suppose we're a bit cautious, you know. Whatever's ruptured out in those woods, a monster's come through the opening, and none of us are equipped to patch it up. That tale gave the boys here in Ohio a royal laugh when I told them about it. I do think we encountered a real hellhound that night. It's become part of our camping legend now. The Hellhound of Ocala scares more people round the campfire than any movie ever could. So, as I wrap up this long-winded account, I hope you and your listeners can make sense of what we experienced. All I got from that spooky encounter was a tale to tell, and the surefire knowledge that there's more out there in the world than I could ever fix with a pipe wrench. I might as well set the scene, right? It won't feel the same if you don't have the context. It was Mardi Gras, down in the beating heart of New Orleans. As big as life, as wild as ever. The city was alive with energy, dancing pulses of sound and color, of joy and pumped-up excitement. Being the curious cat I am, I decided to stray from the pounding heart of Bourbon Street, just for a moment, and found myself wandering down an unfamiliar alley. You bet I was taken in by the spectacle, but there's something about unfamiliarity that truly draws me in. The mystery of the unexplored guides your boots while your head's still caught up in the drum beats and laughter, you know? God, that alley was a different world. Away from the jazz-infused chaos, it was quieter than it should have been for Mardi Gras, more mysterious. There, nestled within the vibrant and murky shades of the narrow passage, was a small voodoo shop. The building was as seasoned as old-time jazz itself. I have always had an interest in the eccentric, the intriguing. This shop was the quintessence of those, filled with a potent sense of the otherworldly, yet bewitching energy. I'm sure it was only there to lure in tourists like myself, but how could I say no? Painted pots of every color spilled from its doorway. Feathered masks and strands of beads overlooked that mess of peculiar jars. Yet within the chaos of Mardi Gras, the building stood almost forgotten. I was a fish on a hook. I stepped inside and the bell above the door rattled a discordant welcome. The air was thick with fragrant incense that curled and eddied in waves. The odor was pungent enough to make me miss the cool outdoor air. The store was crammed with shelves full of eccentric curiosities. Rough-hewn wooden masks, strange herbs, crystals, and the like. But among all those curios, this talisman caught my eye. It was an odd little thing, made of bone, I think, but carved with intricate detail. Almost felt like it was humming in my hand, vibrating with an energy I couldn't quite comprehend. But I played it off as excitement, carnival buzz, shaking the weirdness out of my mind. The owner, an old woman with unreadable eyes, hands as craggy as the city streets, gave me a long, piercing look when I placed it on the counter. She made me feel like prey under a hawk's gaze, chilled me more than the alleyway ever could. She mumbled a few words, a warning maybe, skeletal hand waving over the talisman, cryptic advice about respect and care. Me? I just laughed it off. It was Mardi Gras after all, the time of laughter and wild abandon. I paid her, ducked back out into the alleyway, and rejoined the chaos with my strange new trinket. The revelry seemed only to heighten after that, but I couldn't shake off an odd sensation, like I was being watched. A hot, piercing gaze that slipped through the dense crowd and found me. Peculiar occurrences followed. Footsteps rushed behind me, but no one passed me by. The crowd seemed to writhe and slither, like the bodies of each partygoer had combined into a single serpent. I wrote those illusory beats off as tricks of the mind, excess alcohol, or the city's bizarre charm. One night while I lay down in my hotel room, trying to shake off the buzz of the festival, something changed. It started with a distinct smell, burnt, a sort of brimstone odor mixed with the disgusting hint of charred flesh. The air turned dense, and I could hear this weird, faint, and cryptic whisper, like a conversation between many voices, but in a language unknown to me. Suddenly, my room was filled with a blinding light. It was instantaneous, going from normal to overwhelming brightness. And there, close to the ceiling, hovered a shadow, an entity. Whatever it was, it terrified me. No substantial form to it, just a massive, nebulous darkness, constantly changing between massive, towering heights and small, impish statures. It was a whirl of darkness, eyes glowing a sickly, ominous yellow. The whispering voices gained volume, turned into the most dreadful laugh I have ever heard. It was like a twisted symphony, resounding from all corners of the space. Despite how hot I was frozen. My sense of dread grew with each passing second. I tried to escape, but it was as if an invisible force bound me to the mattress. That was the moment I noticed the talisman. It was pulsating, a forceful, almost angry rhythm. It bathed the room in a ghastly red glow. From the core of my being, I sensed that the talisman was tied to whatever above me. Driven by sheer desperation, and with every fiber of my being screaming, I picked up the talisman and ran. I pushed past the thronging crowd. My heart was pounding like a drum. How did I manage to get out of bed when I'd felt so clearly trapped before? Was that dark mass behind me somewhere, following? I retraced my steps from earlier. The eerie quiet of that solitary alleyway remained a sharp contrast to the riotous festival around me. I flung open the shop's door, almost falling over in my haste. The old woman raised her eyes. She looked from my face to the talisman and sighed, as if expecting this. Wordlessly, she reached over and took the trinket from my trembling hands, before placing it back to its original spot. I instantly felt better. The feeling of being observed, that creepy chill running down my spine, gone. Just like that. After that experience, I walked back into the sea of revelers as if in a haze. The once enticing craziness of Mardi Gras had dulled, eclipsed by overwhelming relief and the echoes of my fear. Now? Well, whenever I look back at that episode in lively New Orleans, I swear I can still smell the faint scent of brimstone mixed with the ripe carnival air. I believe now that what I encountered wasn't just my mind at play or the carnival high. I faced something much more sinister, something darker, that lay in the heart of the beautiful chaos we call Mardi Gras. Either way, that incident opened my eyes to the unseen. It only took one trip to Mardi Gras for me to recognize the dangers we can run into while chasing our own revelry. I think I'll go back next year, but I think I've had my fill of alleyways.